A few weeks ago, I came across this design and I thought, that is super cool. So then, of course, the next question is, how do I build one? And what was running through my mind at the time is those chain links must be tacked together. But that turned out not to be the case. The way this chair works is actually just really basic physics. I'm going to show you exactly how it works later in the video. The official name for this chair is a tensegrity chair. Now, I didn't know what tensegrity meant, so I googled it, and the AI overview tells us that this is a combination of two words, tensional integrity, which I guess it makes sense. It's just two words put together. Tensegrity is a structural principle where isolated, rigid compression components, struts, float within a continuous, self-stabilizing network of tension components, cables, or tendons. I am certainly not a professional woodworker, but I do enjoy doing little woodworking projects every now and then. This is a piece of maple that has been drying in my dad's shop for several years now, and so it should be the perfect little piece for this project. Off camera, I actually planed this down and made it smooth, and now I'm just sanding everything down and getting it cut to size. Maple is certainly not the coolest looking wood out there, but it's what I have, and I've got a whole lot more of this because a few years ago, my dad, my brothers, and I used our Alaskan sawmill and just cut a whole bunch of maple. In fact, we've got some huge pieces of maple that would be great for tabletops, and I'm actually considering in the future building an epoxy table and building some kind of custom metal base for it. I know this is not a woodworking channel, but let me know what you guys think. Would you like to see me build an epoxy table? Sounds like a fun project. I really think that wood and metal together just look better. So in this case, I decided to make a wooden seat and a metal frame around it, and I think that contrast just looks really sharp. Now, as I had mentioned, I'm definitely not a professional woodworker, and so the bottom of this piece of maple is definitely not perfectly flat. And since I'm just building this chair for my own pleasure, I figured I didn't really have to make it perfect. If this was for a customer, I would certainly make that perfectly flat. But in this case, what I'm doing to put that piece of wood in the center is I'm going to weld a tab on each corner and then put 4 holes in each one, and I'm just going to tack them in place and just make sure that I check the top of the piece of wood to make sure it's flush with the metal. Now, of course, after putting that piece of nice wood down on my dirty table, I needed to sand it down one more time. Now it's time to finish this piece of wood. Now, I'm going to go ahead and try this Rubio monocoat, because I've heard that professionals use this stuff and it's actually supposed to be really good. Now, I've never actually used this, but I've seen it done before, and the way you do this is you just pour the Rubio on top of the wood, and then you spread it around and use some type of buffing pad to make sure that it penetrates well into the wood. Now, I looked up a YouTube video, and somebody said you can put a Scotch-Brite pad on your sander and just use that, so that's what I'm doing here. It's not like a traditional stain where you just leave it on the material, but after you buff it in, you actually wipe the stuff off so that there's actually no residue left on the material. After I got this first coat on, it just looked absolutely terrible. There's these little black specks everywhere, and that is just not acceptable. And besides that, it's just a really dark color. I realized this Rubio is black, and that just may not have been the right choice for this maple, because maple really needs something bright to bring out the colors. And I'm going to try it one more time. It's possible that I just didn't apply it correctly. I was reading online, and some people say those little black specks in the wood could actually be metal contamination, which would make sense because my shop is a metal shop, and I'm trying to do woodworking in it. After putting on that second coat, I realized this still looks absolutely terrible, and that coat is just way too dark for this material. So I'm going to go ahead and sand this down and try something different. Now, I should have filled this little crack with epoxy. That's what the professionals would do. But I think that Rubio monocoat actually worked to my advantage because it actually filled that crack for me. Now, this is a bucket of stain that's been sitting in my dad's garage for several years. So I'm going to give it a try and see how well this stuff works. Well, there's no stain coming out, so I'm going to pop the top of this bucket open and see what's going on. I think this stain has seen better days. There's a complete layer of hardened stain on top of this bucket, and that underneath layer looks like something that should be in the honey bucket, not in the stain bucket. Okay, on to choice number 2. This is another finish that's not so old, so let's give this a try and see how well that works. That works for me. This is probably not the best stain that I could have done. I probably could have gotten something a little bit lighter color, but when this dried, I think it actually looked pretty good. Now I went on my computer and went ahead and drew this thing up. I tried to draw out the proportions of this chair so I could actually figure out how to build it. Now I'm just building 2 identical frames, 2 rectangular parts, and 2 L-shaped pieces of metal that are going to have a chain hanging between them. Being self-employed is pretty cool because in a sense you kind of have the freedom to do whatever you want. You don't have a boss looking over your shoulder saying you have to do things this way or do things that way. You can pretty much do jobs on your schedule whenever you want to, which is definitely pretty cool, but there are a few things that you have to keep in mind also. For example, when you're the boss and you're the one in charge, that means you have a lot more responsibility, which if you love what you do, that's not a problem because you're just enjoying it. There are a few things you really just have to keep in mind though, and one of those is you've got to be self-motivated. If you're not a person who has a lot of self-motivation, it may be hard for you to run your own company because you have to give yourself a reason to actually get up in the morning and go to work because there's not a boss that's telling you you have to be to work at a specific time. Another thing with self-employment is it is not a certain income. That is one good thing about working for somebody else is you know you're going to get a paycheck every 2 weeks most likely, and you know about what that paycheck is going to be. But with self-employment, you've got to go chase the work, and if you don't chase the work, you don't get the jobs, then you don't make money. All of that being said, I absolutely love what I do, and it's so rewarding to see projects especially like this that are just so artsy and unique and just see them come to life. As I said, this chair is just for myself, so I've never actually sold furniture like this. If you guys would be interested in buying something like this, let me know in the comments or send me an email, and I'd be happy to make you something like this, or if you have other ideas for cool custom furniture or other artsy kinds of things that you just want to have. Now it's time for the fun part. How does this impossible tensegrity chair actually work without having those links welded together? Well, I'll give you a hint. What you see is what you get. It is exactly what you see here. The right side up L and the upside down L right there. A small piece of chain hangs between there that actually suspends the chair. And then we have chains on the sides that keep the chair from moving side to side. You have to have 4 chains or else this would not work. If you had only 3 chains or 2 chains, then this thing would absolutely collapse. Now the process for putting the chains on was a little bit difficult, and it was just a little bit trial and error because I was trying to get that tension to where the chains weren't super loose. So what I had to do here is instead of just using full chains, I had to take another link and cut it in half and then stick that on the bottom. I had to do this a few times, cutting that bottom link to slightly different lengths, and it ended up being a little bit more than a half of a chain link. But eventually I got something that would work, and I used a clamp to tighten in the one side to make sure that this was actually pretty tight. Now I think if I did this again, I would make that center have a bolt to where you can actually tighten or loosen this thing up. Now I could just throw the piece of wood on the top of this and call it a day, but I want to go above and beyond. So I'm going to go ahead and make a back for this chair. Then it won't just be a bench, but it will hopefully actually be a comfortable chair that I can sit on. I was going to make the back of this chair going straight up at a 90-degree angle. However, when I started putting my pieces in there, I realized that I had cut them a little bit too sharp, which actually ended up working to my advantage. Because I realized on most chairs, that back portion actually has a little bit of an angle to it. Back to the conversation of running your own business, you've got to find a way to advertise your work so that you can actually keep bringing in jobs. And even when you do that, I found that you're still going to have slow seasons. And I find this to be the case even with people who have been running their business for decades. They still have the same troubles, and so you're never going to get to a place where you're just going to have continuous work. If you're a small company anyway, maybe you hire a bunch of employees and you just build your business to where you're going to be making a lot of money and you'll never run out of work. But it seems to be the case even with bigger companies that some months you're going to make more money and some months you're going to make less money. The reason I'm telling you this is because this project is not a paid project. It's all out of my pocket. And I do these personal projects when my work is slow and when I don't have a bunch of money coming in from other jobs. Otherwise, I'd be documenting those jobs. And speaking of that, if you are enjoying what you are seeing so far, hit that like button and that subscribe button. Leave your comments down below. That'll help push out my videos. Now it's time to test if this chair actually works. So you can see, I can actually sit on it, and no, it's not a super stable chair, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to have a little bit of flex to it. But those chains have just enough tension to where you can only go so much side to side, and this chair will not fall over. And I can even stand on it, and it does not fall. When you put weight on those chains, they loosen up, but the chains will never fall off. Now, I measured out the height of this chair and I realized it was a little bit short. Now, there's a couple of things I could do here. I could put a couple of adjustment screws on the bottom and that would bring it up a bit, or I could just turn this thing into a rocking chair, which would also bring it up a bit. Yeah, I'm going to go with that second option. Now, my first attempt here to make a rocker on the bottom is to put that piece of flat bar in the middle and then tack another piece of flat bar on one end and try to clamp this thing down. And I was hoping to get a smooth bend, but that didn't work. So I tried again. I clamped it to the table, and then I got a pipe wrench and tried to just do it a little bit at a time and do it as evenly as I could. Now, that method worked just a little bit better, but that is still not satisfactory because the bend is still not a continuous curve, but it's really uneven. So let's try this again. Another issue I am running into here is that bend is just going to be way too steep. So I'm going to put a couple of spacer plates on the bottom and then we'll try this again. Now that actually seemed to work pretty well. Until it didn't. This is definitely not a chair that I would let my 90-year-old grandma sit in. On a typical rocking chair, those rockers extend beyond the end of the chair. And that's why my rockers are just not working very well, because those rockers are only going to the end of the chair, and so you don't actually have much space to rock back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead and bend some new pieces that stick out beyond the end of the chair quite a bit, and we'll see how that works. And that was absolutely a success. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of those spacer plates on the bottom altogether and shorten that middle piece, and then this should work pretty well. After I did that, I went ahead and added some gussets to those. Now the last couple of things that I needed to do here was to get everything fully welded out. So I went ahead and did that, and now I'm going to go ahead and put some screws into the bottom of this piece of wood, and we should be good to go. And there it is, all finished out. Let me know down in the comments what you think of this. You think it's cool or maybe not so cool? Let me know your thoughts on it. What do you guys think? Should I paint this or just leave it bare metal like this? I was kind of going for that rustic look, so that's why I just kind of left those chains rusty and left the metal bare. If you have enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button and that subscribe button. And also, if you enjoyed this video, I think you'd also really enjoy this one here, where I show you how I made this super cool custom gate. And Lord willing, I will see you on the next video.